7 years ago today, a remarkable recording was made in the German concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen. The recording became part of a radio report on the liberation of that death camp that was filed by Patrick Gordon Walker, who worked for the BBC.
This is London calling North America.
The day I reached Belsen concentration camp, the 5th day of liberation, was a Friday, the day before the Jewish Sabbath. Something like half the surviving prisoners at Belsen were Jews, and the Jewish chaplain to the British Second Army, the Reverend L.H. Hartman, held an eve of the Sabbath service in the open air in the midst of the camp. It was the first Jewish service that many of the men and women present had taken part in for 6 years. It was probably the first Jewish service held on German soil in absolute security and without fear for a decade. Around us lay the corpses that there had not been time to clear away, even after 5 days. 40,000 or more had been cleared, but there were still 1,000 or 2,000 around. And people were still lying down and dying in broad daylight in front of our eyes. This was the background to this open-air Jewish service. During the service, the few hundred people gathered together were sobbing openly, with joy at their liberation, and with sorrow the memory of their parents and brothers and sisters that had been taken from them and gassed and burned. These people knew they were being recorded. They wanted the world to hear their voice. They made a tremendous effort, which quite exhausted them. Listen.
Yisrael Chai, the children of Israel still liveth.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Rabbi Shlomo Nachman ben Yaakov, and this is What Now, or Now What, with Donald and Rabbi Shlomo. We answer the question, you got this far. We made it this far. Now what? That is the topic of the broadcast in general. Today, we had planned to have a special guest. I'm still hopeful that our guest will be able to make it. So far, however, I have not heard from him this morning. Our guest, Raphael or Lodo, is a Roman Catholic, a devout Roman Catholic who several years ago came to the realization that anti-Semitism is absolutely rampant in the Netherlands, where he lives at, and has devoted his life to combating it. Unfortunately, for some reason, he has not made it with us today. He is on the call. I am hoping that he will be able to show up before the end of the broadcast at least. We're going to just have to wait and see. I don't know what happened with him. Hopefully he'll be here. We are joined by Shoshi Randalls this morning, who is sort of our behind-the-scene everything person, a person we are so grateful to, everything that Shoshi and her wonderful husband Shlomo do for us, and also for us as the House of Seven Beggars, as well as my ministry at learnamuna.com. How are you this morning, Shoshi?
I'm good. The weather's warming up. Yay!
Yay.
We were shoveling drifts out of the yard yesterday. We had high winds and blowing snow for 3 days, and a lot of the paths that I had out to the chicken coops and out to the bee yards had all disappeared. So yesterday the wind died down, so I got some burning done, and Shlomo spent part of the day shoveling the paths out so we can move around the yard again.
That's good.
So, yeah, it was a happy day yesterday.
Wonderful. Most of you probably know, but Shoshi and Shlomo live way up in the Great White North, as they call it, up in Canada. I also want to welcome Guy, who is here with us, and Mary DeHart is here. Veronica Port says shalom, who is another one of our absolutely awesome people. Veronica handles the Noahide newsletter and is one of my really active admin in all the groups that I offer on Facebook. Another wonderful, wonderful person without whom we would not be able to do half of what we do. So Shoshi and Veronica, thank you both sincerely from the bottom of my heart. We have other admin as well, but these are the two women who are just really absolutely the bones that make this this work be able to stand up and move. So I'm really grateful to Veronica Port and to Shoshi Randalls. Guy says to Shoshi, so Shoshi said that the song always makes her cry that we played at the beginning. That particular recording has a particular impact on me as well. Those of you who have read the story of my memories from my previous life will recall that I died at Bergen-Belsen. And so that particular song absolutely hits me heavy. Had I survived the war, I might have been one of those Jews singing Hatikva, which of course is the national anthem of Israel. And so that recording is just incredibly powerful to me as well. So Guy says to Shoshi, based on her comment about it making her want to cry, tell Shlomo that actually I guess that's a little bit different, but I see Guy will have the book at the end of the week. Wonderful. Shoshi says, I'll let him know. Oh, you're Shoshi, or you're Shlomo. Okay, I get my Shlomos mixed up. I'll let him know when he gets back from the lab today later on. Delane Davis has joined us. Kathy and I'm assuming David Brown are here with us as well. Mary says, thanks, Shoshi and Veronica. You do valuable work. They do. I tell you, these two women, I don't know what I'd do without both of them. They're both just absolute blessings to what we do here. And seriously, I'm really, 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 Rabbi A and I both are just so indebted to both of them. So, two very incredible people. All right, since Lodu, our guest, is not here, essentially, his story is truly moving, and he was with us at our fireside chat on Sunday evening. Didn't share a whole lot, shared a little bit of his history then. I'm going to see if I can reschedule him if he doesn't make it on today. I have Facebooked him as well, PMing, and so far, according to Facebook, he hasn't seen my post there because I was thinking maybe there's a problem with Hangouts or something. Donald Willinger, who is my normal co-host, is currently, because I talked to him a few minutes ago briefly, he's currently with his doctor right now in San Antonio, Texas, and we pray for Donald that Hashem will give his doctors the wisdom and the skill to do whatever it is that Donald needs to have done for his healing and for his well-being so that he can be with us for many, 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 many more years of inspiration and service. We are very grateful for Donald as well. Carol St. George says hello. She's joined us here, and she is one of also those people that I have so much admiration for. Carol St. George she's not one of our admin or anything, but she has become one of our most valued friends. This woman has a tough life, and despite it, love and dedication for others continues to flow out almost through her pores. She's just such a loving, supporting person. So Carol St. George is here with us as well. Since we don't have Lodu for some reason, or Raphael for some reason, there's a book that I have been considering doing as a study for a number of years. And because of the political overtures of this book, I have been hesitant to do so. One of these days, I think I will anyway. That is a book by Rabbi Meir Kahane of blessed memory called Never Again. It is sort of his magnum opus, you might say. Rabbi Meir Kahane, this is appropriate for this broadcast because what we had hoped to do was discuss anti-Semitism in the Netherlands and across a good portion of the EU, both attempts to combat it as well as first-hand accounts of what's actually going on, which is far more dark than most people, especially here in America, think is going on in Europe. Europe has not seen the level of anti-Semitism that's going on since the rise of the Nazi Party. And I'm not exaggerating. That time was worse. But it has not been as bad since the rise of the Nazi war machine. Rabbi Meir Kahane is a Jew who decided that enough was enough. And he stood up to be counted. He stood up for American Jews. He stood up for Russian Jews. He stood up for Armenian Jews. He stood up for Israeli Jews. His whole life was spent standing up. As a result, he was the first person martyred or murdered in the United States by Al-Qaeda. So, Rabbi Meir Kahane, if I think of the modern people that I consider personal, you're supposed to say, to be politically correct, all soldiers are heroes, all people who fight this or that are heroes, and that's probably true. But we use the word hero pretty lightly these days. Rabbi Meir Kahane, as far as I'm concerned, is a true hero of our people. Like many people who saw the evil in the world and said, I don't accept this, he sometimes went too far, according to social opinion at least. He was embroiled in a number of situations that caused people to be rather unhappy with him, including Jews. But that's what happens when you stand up. When you stand up against the system, and when you say, I'm fed up and I'm not putting up with it anymore, you are inviting the powers that be to attack you. Rabbi Meir Kahane did that, and he never looked back. He created the Jewish Defense League, which is still considered to be a terrorist organization according to the United States government, although I'm told that the USA under Obama actually changed the rules so that no longer can the public see the list of organizations that the government considers to be terrorist organizations. Figure that one out. But that is nonetheless the situation that we have. As far as I know, the JDF has never been taken off that list. The reason that they were on the list is because they stood up for the Jewish people in America. Carol St. George says, the day before I went to the doctor needing a loose crystal, the people who helped me hired a man with special physical therapy now for the first time in 22 years. I can turn my head up and to the right. Baruch Hashem. Huva says, Baruch Hashem. Carol, we are thrilled to hear that. Absolutely thrilled. We are with you. We pray for you on a regular basis. And we support you 100%, and we are so grateful to you for everything that you do for us as a Keruv, as an outreach, and for everybody else. I think you're absolutely awesome. Of that, what you just said, Shoshi and Mary DeHart both say that's wonderful. Keep on improving. It's a wonderful thing to hear. Now, if our guest shows up, and I don't know, I'm not knocking him, by the way, who knows? It could be any number of things. I know that he said he was going to notify a number of people in his part of Europe about the broadcast, and I'm assuming we have people who are not responding who have joined in because he's been sharing our videos a lot, which I know he has been. By the way, those of you, including the Catholic nuns that he works with, who I know he shared this with, we would love to have you say hi to us. You are among friends here. But I don't know why he's not here. I know he was very excited to be here. I find his absence to be very interesting. But I don't want to draw conclusions that I cannot back up. So I don't know why he's not here, and we hope that he will be. But so if he comes in, we're going to go ahead and break off the reading here and speak with Raphael. But I'm going to turn to page 5. If you have the book, Never Again by Rabbi Meir Kahana. We're going to sort of skip around through the book, just read some highlights that I think reveal a lot about the rabbi, but more really about the state of the Jews here in the United States. And we hope to have more information from the Netherlands when our guest gets here, or we'll try to reschedule him for a future date if he can't make it. Page 5, the deafening silence. And as always, I invite your comments, questions as we go through this material. On May 13th, 1939, a ship sailed out of the German city of Hamburg. On board were 930 Jews sailing from their native land, leaving behind all that they owned, turning their back on a lifetime and upon a fatherland gladly. It was the worst of times in the Third Reich, as the madness of Adolf Hitler gained irrational momentum. 6 years of Nazi rule had escalated into terror, concentration camps, beatings, and degradation, and 930 Jews were leaving that nightmare that had once been their home. They were among the last Jews who were given the opportunity to leave the land of the Aryans alive before the night of the Panzers descended upon Europe. In all of this world, of all of its many ports, of all of the nations that existed, only one decided to grant refuge to these 930 desperate refugees. In their pockets, the German Jews held entry visas to Cuba, and in their hearts, grateful thanks to the Havana government that, alone among all the countries of the world, this by the way includes the U.S., had agreed to accept them. But Jews are usually too hasty in their gratitude to the nations of this world. And before they even reached Havana, they were informed that the Cuban government would not allow them to enter. The visas, it was ruled, were illegal. The ship reached Havana and docked, a figurative stone's throw away from Miami Beach, where other Jews played in the surf and watched their dog races in the evenings. And in the very backyard of Collins Avenue, where still other Jews tanned themselves and ate from the legendary Jewish menus and enjoyed the good life. How close to the American nirvana stood the 930, and how very far away from salvation they really were. The drama unfolded as millions of Americans watched. Cuba remained adamant. Under a wave of anti-Semitism that appeared in the Cuban newspapers and among its politicians, Havana insisted that the visas were illegal, that she had already taken in Jews, and, the unkindness cut of all, what about the great colossus of democracy to the north, the United States? The question was a good one, and grew more cogent as it became clear that neither Cuba nor any other country was prepared to accept the unwelcome refugees. It became pressing as the days passed, and the German ship lifted anchor, setting sail for a grim mockery that was called home. Home to Hitler went the 930 souls. And the American Jewish brothers and sisters, what were they doing? What awesome rallies and demonstrations were being organized? What militant and angry Jewish groups were mounting protests to show the world that the Jews would not sit idly by while almost 1,000 of their own flesh and blood were being dragged back to that hellhole? Surely those organizations and leaders who in years to come would surge forward on behalf of the civil rights movement, even to the point of willingly breaking the law when the problem was not exactly death camps, but the right of people to sit in the front of a bus in Birmingham or to drink soda at the same fountain as the whites in Jackson. Surely such zealots for human freedom and human rights would climb over the barricades on behalf of their fellow Jews who faced the specter of death. Surely all the liberals and the humanists who in the future would go to Selma confident that they would indeed overcome, if only they made the necessary sacrifices, surely they were prepared to make at least those same sacrifices on behalf of their own people in this year of Hitler's rise. And yet, the silence was deafening. The record is obscenely empty of any vigorous sacrifice on the part of those Jewish leaders who were supposed to lead us and those Jewish groups who were organized to defend us. Those who went to jail in Selma for the cause of civil rights did not even consider the possibility of chaining themselves to the White House gates to call attention to the plight of the 930 who, themselves, symbolized millions of others who were on the brink of slaughter. Aside from efforts by the Joint Distribution Committee, which was not a membership organization and which was created solely to aid the refugees, the Jewish establishment groups limited their efforts to respectable, pious petitions to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. For American Jews, there was the Almighty God, and then there was Roosevelt. And not necessarily in that order. Roosevelt, for whom all Jews voted. Roosevelt, whose passing upon which all Jews wept as if for a close and beloved relative. Roosevelt, for whom they will not speedily build monuments in Israel. Franklin Roosevelt watched as the 930 Jews sailed along the Atlantic coast on their way back to Hitler. He could have opened the doors, but he did not. He could have saved not only 900, but 9,000, 99,000, 9,900,000, but he and all the other Western democracies at whose altars the Jews worshipped with such piety didn't even lift a finger for the Jew. The political theory of relativity was clear. When the world is in trouble, it is demanded of the Jew that he help them, because he is, after all, a human. When the Jew is oppressed, humanity is freed from any obligation, because it is, after all, but a Jewish problem. Roosevelt heard the pleas of the Jewish leaders, and sadly told them that he couldn't do anything to help. There was, after all, a quota system in effect, and the German quota was already filled. Let the 930 come in, and let their numbers be counted to next year's quota, or the next decade's quota. Surely some way could be thought up by a brilliant president like he, for whom we had all voted. But the President of the United States could never do such a thing. Bending the law was a thing that one just did not do. Roosevelt never bent the law. And so, he sympathized, but he did nothing. And with deep regrets, he went home. And so, as the St. Louis came close enough to Miami that the refugees could see the lights of the city where at that very moment Jews were laughing and amusing themselves as the St. Louis mournfully headed past the American shore, followed by the United States Coast Guard ships under order to prevent any refugee from jumping overboard, as the President of the United States sympathetically refused to save 930 Jews and went home. The American Jewish establishment slipped silently into the night, and they too went home. There were no loud and angry protests. There were no violations of law. There were none of the things that certain Jewish leaders later did for the civil rights struggle in Selma and Jackson. Like thieves in the night, we simply slunk away and went home. And as American Jews went home, so did the 930. Look homeward, 930 future angels. Look homeward to Hitler. Behind them, they left a grief-stricken, if paralyzed, liberal Jewish community. For let it not be said that American Jews do not feel for their brothers and sisters. The New York Times, in one of its impeccable editorials, might have spoken for all the Jewish leaders, organizations, and masses when it wrote, "We can only hope that some hearts will soften somewhere and some refuge could be found. The cruise of the St. Louis cries to high heaven of man's inhumanity to man." Indeed. And the editorial of the New York Times stank of the fraud of the respectable people whose sole contribution to the crisis of the refugees was, quote, "a hope that some hearts would soften somewhere." Never was there a thought, either in the minds of the Times nor the Jewish establishment, that perhaps actions to help softening that softening process might be attempted. Never did the respectables consider taking it to the streets to demand justice for 930 brothers and sisters. Sympathy, yes, but militancy, never. And so the 930 passed into history. Their immediate ends was produced by the Germans. But no Jew who sat by silently can really sleep well at night. Because then came the darkness. With a terrible suddenness, the war that all the pacifists and all the mothers and all the isolationists sought to avoid came anyway. Those who had cheered Munich for bringing them peace in their time suddenly understood what a minority of warmongers had seen all along, that one could not simply avoid being eaten by an alligator merely by feeding one's neighbor to him. One could not avoid being eaten by an alligator merely by feeding one's neighbor to him. Wow. Munich had only guaranteed a Holocaust and placed the free world at a bitter disadvantage. We know what happened. We know the deaths. We know the terrible things that happened. We're going to skip forward now to page 21. The loss of Jewish identity. Once upon a time, the Jew of America, the Jews came to America. He went to the sweatshops and he worked so that his son might be an American. He peddled on bitterly cold nights on Delancey Street, meaning he was selling things on the street, and under the hot, dusty, sweaty sun in Rivington, so that his child might see better days as an American. He lived in his roach-ridden and rat-infested tenements at a time when there was little social consciousness to protest his plight, so that his son might be better off than he as an American. He worked long, hot hours under terrible labor conditions at a time when there were few unions or wage and hours laws to stop the exploiters, so that his son might go to school and better himself as an American. He was determined that his son should be educated in the schools that did not relate to him as a Jew, under teachers who were not community residents and who did not understand him as a Jew and his background, where the language spoken was not Yiddish of his home, as at his home, and where there were never enough books or recreational facilities so that all of his son might be able to move on and move up as an American. The good life was not given to the exploited and hard-working Jew of Europe who came here to America in ships steerage and lived in tenement steerage and who worked like Jewish dogs that he was, so that his son might become a real American. The Jew came to America with a Judaism that had survived an exile of 20 centuries. It was his invisible baggage that eluded the customs officials at Ellis Island. He arrived and hastened to build his traditional synagogues, where the substance of fervent belief and the reality of tears on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, allowed the Almighty God to feel at home in his house. He carried over the richness of a difficult but meaningful Sabbath, and he made sure that his home was sanctified by kosher foods. He continued a long traditional Jewish family life that, for centuries, was the envy of all the nations. He was a proud nationalist, and he felt for each and every Jewish tragedy. Jewishness was a thing to which he could relate to every fiber of his body, and it was this fervent attachment to Judaism and to the Jewish people that helped him sustain himself in the land of Columbus. The Jew came to America, one more link in a stubborn chain reaching back centuries, fortified with a faith of deep substance and a great moral and spiritual strength. He was imbued with a deep pride at being Jewish and at an understanding that he was part of the Jewish people. It was this which had sustained him and his fathers before him in a Europe where the Tsar impressed his 8-year-old child into the army for 25 years. It was this which had kept him from surrendering when the pogromists sought his body and the church sought to destroy his soul. It was this which preserved him when the bitter winter sapped his energy and the bitter poverty grasped at his very existence. It was this which now sustained him in his new America, during days of weary toil and nights of slum-dwelling poverty. It was this which kept him from sinking into the despair of alcohol, the cynicism of rioting, or surrendering to hate and moral degradation. The Jew took his Jewishness with him into the streets and into the sweatshops when he began the long process of becoming an American. He looked forward to the great Jewish dream, making a life for his son that would be better than the one into which he himself had been born. He dreamed of his son being a fine American and a good Jew. And that son gladly and eagerly gave in to the Tsar what was in his mind, and then informed the Jewish God that he would have to be satisfied with 10 cents on the dollar. It was not that he wanted to totally run away from his Jewish heritage. Raised as a cheder and remembering the old synagogue, unable to forget the Passover Seder and the Shabbat candles and meals, the son of the Jewish immigrants did not seek to destroy Judaism, only to come to an accommodation with it. Live and let live. One thing above all, however, haunted him: the fear of anti-Semitism. He was gripped by the need to do everything he could to prevent it from happening to him in this land, including the Americanness of his Judaism. One could continue to be a Jew without wearing his Jewishness on his sleeve. The way to get ahead in America was to understand the reality of the New World and to remember that this was not, after all, Poland, Russia, Austria, nor even Turkey. Here, one did not have to be a fanatic about his religion. To flaunt one's Jewishness was to invite anti-Semitism and to put up needless barriers to success. In every event, the primary thing about being Jewish was to have a good Jewish heart, to love your neighbor, and to speak, sometimes, about the Ten Commandments. Accommodations would have to be made, and Jewishness would have to adapt itself to the American lifestyle. If one was fortunate enough to live in a free country, he would then have to lower his religious barriers. At last, after so many years of persecution, the Jew now had an opportunity to live free, and he would not have to throw it away. In America, all people were equal, and they should, as far as possible, minimize their differences. No one could expect a Jew who came to the land of progress and science to retain intact a Judaism and a Jewishness which was parochial or provincial. If one demanded to be treated as all other Americans, he could not, at the same time, emphasize his Jewish differences. The Jew was prepared to keep his Jewishness, but he would have to endure many changes and undergo the proper kinds of revisions to it. Those rituals which were old-fashioned would have to go, and those practices that were too outlandish could not be retained. Jewish identity was important, for sure, but it could not be too strident. It would have to be muted. One could be a Jew and at the same time not flaunt it. One could be the kind of Jew that America would not be ashamed of. It was with the knowledge that he could climb the ladder of success in America with determination to do so and to be a wariness of anything that might hinder him, that the son of the wandering Jew created his own brand of American Jewishness. That son, raised in Yiddish homes, where prayers were given to God in an un-American tongue, and where customs were foreign to those of the American shore, that son whose parents' accent grated on his hard-earned American ear, and whose father's lack of savoir-faire made one who wished to enter the mainstream so uncomfortable, that son whose demanding religion was just too much of a burden in modern America, and whose Jewishness was a yoke on a Sammy who wanted so much to run away. That son determined to grow up to be a real American. He succeeded mightily in that, and more. He grew up to be that mighty force, the American occasional Jew. He became the Jew driven by insecurity and doubts to show the Gentiles that he was just as good as they. He became the one pushed by the great need to be accepted and fearful complexes to the loved and at least tolerated. He was the Jew who proclaimed his equality, but he was forever looking over his shoulder to see if the anti-Semite might be there. It was not enough for him to discard his beard and his unfashionable clothing. He had to throw off that embarrassing Judaism. One cannot take a man into the new world without ridding him of the old world identity and inferiority. And the first generation, son of the laboring Zeta, carried his albatross around his circumcised neck. It consisted of his embarrassment with his antiquated faith, his fear of what the Gentile might think of his medieval and so very strange differences, his distaste for anything that might link him to anything foreign, too Jewish, passed. And so the hater of Jewish fanaticism became a fanatic in his attempts and efforts to escape it. He took Jewish substance and he traded it for Bagels and Lox Judaism. Do not believe that one who cries out, he is a Jew at heart. American Judaism is based on intestines. He took a synagogue inhabited by heaven and he substituted it for a Jewish community center run by a caterer. In his self-inferiority and vague sense of shame, he cast away the traditions of a meaningful, disciplined Yaakov, and he became an American Esau, selling his magnificent birthright for the lentils of the American good life. The hatred and contempt manifested by the anti-Semite is an attempt to degrade the Jew. It is an effort to instill within him a feeling of inferiority. In the case of the American Jew, it succeeded too often. Too often, running Sammy, this by the way is a reference to the black slaves of the Old South trying to run away to the North, trying to get freedom, and also bending and kowtowing and that sort of thing. Too often, running Sammy seemingly believed the anti-Semite. Too often, he agreed to his scheme to promote self-hatred and shame, with subsequent attempts to escape his own Jewishness. Those who changed their too Jewish-sounding names, those who gave their children exotically waspish-sounding Christian names, those who cringed at the sight of a bearded Hasid, those who attempted to change their religious practices so that they might be more in line with the accepted practices, those who shrank from the militant Jewish defense of their rights, and of course, those who chose to escape from all things Jewish, totally, whether through religious conversion, through total lack of identification with anything Jewish, or through revolutionary internationalism, what we today would call globalism, all of these succumbed to the effects and the efforts of the anti-Semite. All buried Jewish pride and raised high the flag of retreat from too militant Jewish identity. All hoped to escape Gentile Jew hatred by adopting a Jewish kind of self-hate. We see going on right now in Israel for the elections. I've been posting a little bit about Moshe Feiglin's views of how American-born Jew Benjamin Netanyahu is dealing with the Jewish issues that are rising in Israel today. We see this same headspace as Prime Minister Netanyahu and Likud are trying to appease the enemies, hoping that they will like them. It does not work, as Moshe Feiglin so clearly says. They will not accept us, ever. It is a fact. It doesn't matter if you have payas, if you have a beard, if you wear a kippah, if you dress like a Jew. It doesn't matter if you cut your beard, cut your payas, stop wearing kippot, start dressing in modern, politically correct, savvy appearances. It doesn't matter. They have hated us since the beginning, and that hatred shows no sign of ending until the coming of Mashiach. We're going to take a break now, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. I have created a series, or I am creating a series of intermissions so that you'll get different ones all the time. Today I'm going to introduce you for the first time to another one of our 5-minute intermissions. These are photographs that Ahuva and I took in Israel back in 2013. As we take a 5-minute pause, get up and stretch your legs, get some tea, relax, and we'll be back, Bezrat Hashem, in 5 minutes.
כל עוד בלבב פנימה נפש יהודי הומיה ולפתי מזרח קדימה ein lezion Sofia od lo avda tikvatenu התקווה בת שנות 2000 להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים הבאנו שלום עליכם הבאנו שלום עליכם הבאנו שלום עליכם הבאנו שלום 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 עליכם הבאנו שלום עליכם הבאנו שלום עליכם הבאנו שלום עליכם הבאנו שלום 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 עליכם We're bringing peace unto you. We're bringing peace unto you. We're bringing peace unto you. And then shalom, shalom. We're bringing peace unto you. We're bringing peace unto you. We're bringing peace unto you. Abenu shalom, shalom. Abenu shalom aleichem. Abenu shalom aleichem. Abenu shalom aleichem. Abenu shalom, shalom, shalom aleichem. Praise the Lord. Praise God. Praise the Lord.
בלקוט כתוב, עם ישראל חי, עוד אבינו חי. על כל אבן מהכותל, כתוב בדם ובדמעות, עם ישראל חי. ובריתו של כל יהודי, אחיינו באחים שפיר כתוב. בדמעות ובתפילה ובתחנונים, עוד אבינו חי, עוד אבינו חי.
And we're back. The time that we had in Israel in 2013 was absolutely awesome, and it is our prayer that Hashem will permit us to go back to the Holy Land one more time, and preferably actually to make Aliyah and live there. There's no place on earth like Israel. Every climate, almost, you'll find in Israel. Every geographic design, mountains, deserts, beautiful seashores, everything is in Israel. everything. It is truly the heart of the world. Back on the chat screen, scrolling down here, we see, where did we get to? My screen jumped as always. Mary is happy that Carol was feeling better and was healed of that particular problem. Mary says she has to go take a nap. Pain is too intense. God bless you, Mary. Our prayers are certainly with you. We hope you get feeling better. We are now back. If you have things to share, I would like to now go to an open conversation. If we don't have discussion coming up, we will continue on with a program for Jewish survival. I will give this to your discretion. The way that you'll decide is whether or not you type. That sound fair, Shoshi? I think Shoshi has stepped away.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that sounds very fair.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts or anything you'd like to share?
Oh, the stuff that was written by Kahani is just it's rearing its head again. I don't think it ever left. Mm-hmm. It's just becoming more and more obvious now for whatever reason. And it's very sad. It's rather disheartening in a way.
It is. One thing that that really strikes me is growing up, whenever the topic of anti-Semitism arose or the Holocaust issues arose, like a lot of people that I talked to, I was positive. Now it's over. Now the world has seen what the Nazis did. They understand what anti-Semitism is. That's it. And yet, every year at the Seder, the Pesach Seder, we continue to say, in every generation, they come to genocide us. It's not over. It has not been this bad in the United States or Europe since the Nazi era. And Hitler didn't simply pop on the scene, like a lot of people seem to think. Hitler was elected by democratic methods. Hitler arose, tried to stir up some trouble, served a little bit of time in jail. While he was in jail, he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle. And then he ran as a politician. And he actually stated himself, I don't have the exact quote with me, I probably should have looked it up, but Hitler actually stated that I will not push my reforms without the agreement of the German people. But he wasn't exactly honest in it either. The German people weren't coming together quickly enough around his new National Socialist Party. And so he had a really good idea, he thought. He sent some of his supporters to Poland to kill some innocent Poles, which they did. They then stole the uniform of those Poles, and then they came back into Berlin, and they torched the Reichstag, the White House, if you would, the Congress, if you would, of Germany. People saw these Poles, these communists, burning down the Reichstag. There was no question. If it were today, it would have been all over the internet, pictures seeing it. People knew for sure. What they didn't know was that the people wearing those Polish uniforms were Nazis. Hitler said, "See the threat we face." Now remember, Hitler was a socialist. He was not a Republican. I keep hearing that. It's inaccurate. National Socialism. And he meant by socialism, socialism. The reason he didn't like the Russians was that the Russians were a different brand of socialism, a brand over which he had no power. Socialism, by definition, requires complete control top down. Why? Because everything is given into the authority of the government. Food, clothing, shelter, health care, everything goes under government control. The government has to control all areas of your life in order to establish so-called equality. A book that all Americans need to read is the Communist Manifesto. Because the Communist Manifesto explains how the communist ideal would eventually be met. Socialism. Socialism forces unity, forces quote-unquote equality by government mandate. The theory is of communism that once people are forced to submit to absolute control, the hierarchy can then just drift away, and people will continue to live that way without an effective government, just simply communally working together. That's the theory put forth in the Communist Manifesto. Thus far, there has never been a communist government, including in Russia or in China. No country has ever attained true communism. But what we have seen, whether it's in China and Russia, whether it is in anywhere else, in Nazi Germany with Russia, socialist fighting socialist for control of the masses. That too is part of socialism. In the United States today, we are doing exactly what was done in Germany. Germany was a republic that had some serious problems, some serious issues. The socialists came with the solution. America is a country that has some serious problems. The socialists come with a solution. In all cases, the problem always, historically, falls to the Jews. It's our fault. We now have members of the United States Congress who are avowed socialists. Those socialists are blaming the Jews. It is our fault. Whatever it is our fault. This is the way socialism works. Winston Churchill made a famous statement when he said, any man who's not a socialist, he actually said liberal, when he's young has no heart. Any man who's not a conservative when he becomes a grown-up has no brain. As a kid, I thought socialism sounded great. It's like Star Trek. You know, we all have everything's in common. There's a United Federation of Planets. It sounds great. Until you get older and you start learning what it means. Another wise person, and I don't recall who it was, I've seen it attributed to various people, but said that capitalism may be the worst form of government on earth, other than every other form of government on earth. Capitalism has major problems, but it's better than any other system that we've devised so far. Socialism, in its various manifestations, is the worst, in part because it promises things that cannot possibly be delivered. Cortez and the other people, Bernie Sanders, and pretty much the entire Democrat Party has signed on for this. And I don't want to go political with this topic, but socialism does not work. It has been proven time and time again. If you have a socialist regime, it will be the Jews who will be the scapegoats. Since we haven't had any more comments, let's go ahead and turn, if you have the book, to page 239, A Program for Jewish Survival. A program for Jewish survival. The Jew in the United States stands surrounded by his shattered myths and his troubled failures. The guaranteed annual security for which he struggled so long and for whose attainment he built his particularly American Jewish way of life, is no closer to realization today than it was half a century ago. Now, this book, by the way, was written in 1971, and this is still true today. Despite his socioeconomic growth, he still faces not only the serious threat of anti-Semitism that could be activated by a host of American tragedies, but also an even greater danger to his very existence, the explosion of assimilation and alienation that threatens to rip his child from the Jewish people and to wipe out generations of Jews for future. The problems of poverty, crime, changing neighborhoods, and reverse discrimination that affects millions of his compatriots have not been met properly. Jewish leadership remains a sometime thing, disjointed, timid, and unreceptive to Jewish needs. There is trouble in the Jewish paradise today, and the Jew, sensing a loss of purpose and meaning for his life, and lacking deep roots and a sense of identity, seeks solutions. He seeks a program for Jewish survival, both physically and spiritually, as a Jew. The beginning of this Jewish wisdom lies in the regeneration and the realization of the Jew as a Jew. It entails replanting within him the souls of Hadar, pride, nationalism, self-respect, and a clear Jewish identity. It demands the flowing forth from this Hadar of Ahavat Yisrael, of the love of all fellow Jews. I'm going to put a parenthesis here that applies more today than it did in Rabbi Kahana's time, regardless of the movement to which that Jew belongs. The love of one's fellow Jew regardless of the movement that Jew belongs to. The feeling of their pain and the setting out to alleviate that pain. It decrees the acceptance of a program of survival that calls for Jewish strength, both moral and physical. Without this sort of pride, national identity, and ties to the peoplehood, the Jew faces not only his own spiritual and cultural disappearance as a distinct entity before the onslaught of assimilation and apathetic alienation, but also the collapse and destruction before the forces of anti-Semitism. For loss in Jewish pride and identity leads to a refusal to see and to recognize the escalating danger, self-delusion, and false optimism over Jewish integrity into society and Jewish stability and security therein, and to a failure to recognize the common bond and the common danger facing all Jews, and a consequent refusal and a failure to join together in unified efforts to stop this flood. We at the House of Seven Beggars and LearnAmuna.com and SevenBeggars.com are committed to this end. We are committed to the belief that a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. We are committed to standing together with our people, regardless of movement, regardless of sectarian concerns. This is absolutely critical if Jews are going to continue to exist as a people into the future. Continuing on page 240, the end the spiritual threat to the Jew. To implant into ourselves and into our youth Hadar and Ahavat Yisrael become the immediate ethical priority. It is the foundation of a Jewish progress for the survival that calls for both moral and physical Jewish power. It must begin with the reordering of our priorities and with the gathering of Jewish assets, energies, efforts, and money into a unified effort to meet Jewish problems. In other words, we need to support those karuf, those outreaches that are blessing us financially as well as in other ways. The federations that control Jewish funds throughout the country must be democratized and committed to really important and strictly Jewish programs. They often are not. The first priority, the one that will ensure us a generation that is filled with Hadar and Ahavat Yisrael, is to set aside the lion's share of Jewish philanthropic funds for Jewish education. Jewish education is vital. Again, that is the goal of the House of Seven Beggars and LearnAmuna.com. It would be difficult for a writer of fiction to paint a scenario as absurd as the one involving the Jewish establishment, the Jewish day school system, and the young American Jew. No one would give credence to a plot wherein wise and distinguished leaders of a community see the destruction of future millions of Jewish youth drifting away to the Elysian fields of apathy, disinterest, and alienation, and yet still refuse to support the surest, perhaps the only, answer to this drift: Jewish education. Nevertheless, this is precisely what is happening. As old and reactionary Jewish leaders and bureaucrats find funds for any sort of nonsense, but only a pittance for Jewish survival through knowledge and through pride. It is not the Jewish hospital that will preserve Jews 25 years from now, nor will the community center basketball team. A minimum of 25% of all Jewish community funds must be set aside by all the federations for maximizing Jewish education. Again, this was written in the 70s. It is still not the case today. By this is meant the day school movement, and not the 1 or 3 times a week after hour religious school that is the bane of all Jewish educational existence in America and is the cause of our spiritual bankruptcy. Federation funds set aside for those schools are, for the most part, monies flung down a rat hole. If they continue to be allotted, they must remain totally separate from the 25% of the budget set aside for meaningful and maximizing Jewish education. Skipping a little bit. Scholarship must be set aside for those deserving disadvantaged, or for those who desire to attend day schools, but whose parents are unwilling or unable to pay. Scholarships must be granted to make these things possible. We skip ahead to page 244. Jewish tradition should be emphasized so that the Jewish youngster can know enough to make an intelligent choice for himself in future years. One can always and quite easily decide to be an alienated or non-practicing Jew, but one should at least know the other side of the coin, that which he is throwing away. Jewish heroes and martyrs must be brought to the attention of the Jewish people and Jewish youngsters in particular, and their photographs and biographies should be made available to them. Anniversaries of their deaths should be observed, and special weeks of months should be set aside by the Jewish people for Jewish pride. And it goes on. Rabbi Kahana has a number of solid ideas of how we can forward Jewish identity through educating our own people. We continue on 246 after we look at the chat screen here. Shoshi says, we also hold our arms wide open to welcome Noahides and Seekers of Truth. Thank you, Shoshi. Very important point. That's a big part of what we do. And Carol says, thank you as one of those Noahides. You are welcome, Carol. I am glad to call you my friend and my sister. Marilyn says, likewise. Carol says, as I am you as a friend and sister. Guy says, okay, I can listen with no distraction. Haven't seen my son for a couple of weeks. He just left. Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're back with us. I hope you had a good time visiting with your son, Guy. So on page 246, Mercahana continues. This particular one, we had no idea back in the 70s how serious this was going to become. Now we do. On campuses, continuous Jewish identity must be stressed with tables of literature dealing with Israel, the Soviet Jewish issues. These are referring to back in the day before Soviet Jewry was allowed to immigrate to Israel. To Jewish identity, Jewish pride and trepidation, available free for all of those who desire to take it. Yes, we do not seek converts, but we must reach out to non-Jews and tell them who we are, why it is to their benefit to cease anti-Semitic ways, why it is to their benefit to support their country, America or any other, standing firmly with Israel. Jewish leaders and groups cannot wait for young people to come to them. We must go on the campuses, we must sit, and we must talk with the youth. We must not wait, we must not watch as Arab propaganda floods the campuses, doing so much harm against the state of Israel that 10 Egyptian divisions could not save it. It is not only that the students become Arab sympathizers, but the vast majority of them become neutral to Israel. Inundated by the flood of Arab argumentation, almost all well-written, substantively good, and the most professional and the slickest forms of all, thousands of students begin to, quote, understand the Arab side. And they are deterred to a middle-of-the-road position that sees good and bad in both Israel and the Arab camps. This results in a blasé rendition of a plague on both your houses. The Arab asks for nothing more than this. If future generations of Americans, if the future leaders of Israel's strongest allies can be neutralized, this itself would be a great victory of greatest magnitude. And this is what has happened since the 1970s. We must not wait for the leftists to flood the campuses with their siren songs that rip away Jewish youth, while their attacks upon Israel as lackeys of imperialism, aggressors, and fascist racist states, etc. We must not wait for the Arabs or the leftist teach-ins against Israel before we panic and seek solutions. That is the Jewish curse, a myopathy that hovers over us, that blinds us to problems until things are upon us that can devour us. Only then, when we are in that horrible position, do we finally wrench ourselves free from our paralysis. Only then do we begin rushing about in frenzied panic, seeking a solution to our misfortunes, a solution that has been mocked by us in yesteryear, when there was still time to change it. Now we realize our error. Now we repent. But usually it's too late. The campuses must become regular havens for Jewish identity and demonstrations. Let Jewish students take the offensive and let them hold their own teach-ins on behalf of Israel and Soviet Jewry and Jews in Arab lands or Jewish identity everywhere. Let every significant date serve as an opportunity for ceremonies and for rallies on our campuses. Let the names and the pictures of the Jewish national liberation heroes be as famous or more famous than those of other world figures. All of these roads lead to increasing Jewish knowledge, and Jewish knowledge is the key to Jewish pride and love of our people. They cost money, but the Jew can find the money. It is there. He needs only to direct it away from nonsense and non-Jewish causes. If he understands the urgency of the need, he will do so. Jewish knowledge, Jewish pride, Jewish self-respect, and Jewish identity. A history upon which we can look back proudly. A present in which we can struggle idealistically. A future to point out to ecstatically. Give these to the young Jew, and then he will not need to wander aimlessly and desperately seeking a meaning to his life. He will not be forced into strange causes or into strange temples of exotic gods. He will not be driven to seek himself or to search himself out. He will know who he is. He will not step every exotic cause and every weird creature to ask, hey, I am lost. Where's the road home? He will not be propelled into a world of drugs that turns him away from reality that is empty for him. In the end, all the administrations and all the graphic proofs and the horrors of drugs mean nothing to a youth who is already left into the flames of addiction because there is nothing positive or meaningful to his life in the first place. Give him meaning, and he will not need drugs. Give him a cause for which to fight, and he will not run away to the safety of narcotics and false religions. Tell him who he is, and he will not find himself mad. Jewish education, maximum, vibrant, unashamedly. This will resurrect Hadar and Ahavat Yisrael. This will water and revive a parched and spiritually barren Jewish desert. This will save generations born and unborn, those who are with us today and those who are not yet here with us. The rabbi goes on. Again, these were readings from the book Never Again by Rabbi Meir Kahane, the founder of the Jewish Defense League. We really should do a full reading of that book at some point, I think. It's an incredibly powerful book. Those people who do not like Rabbi Meir Kahane do not understand Rabbi Meir Kahane. It's that simple. Anyone who stands with Israel, anyone who stands with the Jewish people, honestly has no reason not to stand with Rabbi Meir Kahane. Rabbi Kahane, back in 1988, wrote an open letter to the world. I'd like to share this with you. And again, if you have any questions or comments, we're going to end in about 14 minutes. So please, if you have questions or comments, post them in the chat screen. Here's what Rabbi Meir Kahane wrote. November 1988, shortly before his murder. Dear world, it appears that you are hard to please. I understand that you're upset over us here in Israel. Indeed, it appears that you're quite upset, even angry, even outraged. Indeed, every few years you seem to become upset over us. Today, it's the brutal repression of the Palestinians. Yesterday, it was Lebanon. And before that, it was the bombing of the nuclear reactor in Baghdad, or it was the Yom Kippur War campaign. It appears that Jews who triumph and who, therefore, live, upset you most extraordinarily. Of course, dear world, long before there was an Israel, we, the Jewish people, upset you. We upset a German people who elected a Hitler, and we upset an Austrian people who cheered his entry into Vienna. And we upset a whole slew of Slavic nations, Poles, Slovaks, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, Russians, Hungarians, Romanians. And we go back a long, long way in the history of world upset. We upset the Cossacks of Chemyelniki, who massacred tens of thousands of us in 1648 to 49. We upset the Christian Crusaders who, on their way to liberate the Holy Land, were so upset at the Jews that they slaughtered untold numbers of us. We upset for centuries a Roman Catholic Church that did its best to define our relationship through inquisitions. And we upset the arch enemy of the church, Martin Luther, who, in his call to burn the synagogues with the Jews within them, showed admirable Christian ecumenical spirit. It is because we became so upset over upsetting you, dear world, that we decided to leave you, in a manner of speaking, and to establish the Jewish nation. The reasoning was that living in close contact with you as resident strangers in your various countries comprising you, we upset you, we irritated you, we disturbed you. What better notion then for us to leave you and thus to love you, and perhaps to have you love us. And so we decided to come home to the same homeland from which we were driven out 1900 years earlier by a Roman world that, apparently, we also upset. Alas, dear world, it appears that you're hard to please. Having left you, and your pogroms and your inquisitions and your holy crusades and your Holocaust, having taken our leave of the general world to live alone in our own little state, we continue to upset you. You are upset that we repress those poor Palestinians. You're deeply angered over the fact that we do not give up the lands of 1967, which, by the way, are again up for negotiation, apparently. I've been writing on that. And that clearly is the only obstacle that there is to Middle East peace. Moscow is upset, and Washington is upset too. The Arabs are upset, and those gentle Egyptian moderates, they're upset. Well, dear world, consider the reaction of a normal Jew from Israel. He, by the way, was born in the United States. In 1920, 1921, and 1929, there were no territories of 1967 to impede with peace between Jews and Arabs. Indeed, there was no Jewish state to upset anybody. Nevertheless, the same oppressed and repressed so-called Palestinians slaughtered hundreds of Jews in Jerusalem, in Haifa, in Sfat, and in Hebron. Indeed, 67 Jews were slaughtered in one day in Hebron in 1929. Dear world, why did those Arabs, those so-called Palestinians, massacre 67 Jews in one day on 1929? Could it have been their anger over the Israeli aggression of 1967? And why were 510 Jewish men, women, and children slaughtered in the Arab riots between 1936 and 39? Was it because the Arabs were upset over 1967? And when you, dear world, proposed a UN partition plan in 1947 that would have created a Palestinian state along with a teeny tiny little Israel, and the Arabs decried and went to war and killed 6,000 Jews, was that upset stomach caused by the aggression of 1967? And by the way, dear world, why didn't we hear you cry or upset then? Oh, the poor Palestinians who today kill Jews with explosives and firebombs and stones are part of the very same people who, when they had all the territories that they're now demanding for their attempted state and their attempt to drive the Jews into the sea, those same twisted faces, the same hate, the same cry of Ibda al-Yahud, slaughter the Jews, that we hear today, that we see today, we saw then, we heard then. And the same people, the same dream, destroy Israel. What they failed to do yesterday, they dream to do today. But of course, we should not oppress them. Dear world, you stood by as the Holocaust happened. And you stood by in 1948 as 7 states launched a war that the Arab League proudly compared to the Mongol massacres. You stood by in 1967 as Nasser, wildly cheered by violent mobs in every Arab capital of the world, vowed to drive the Jews into the sea. And you would probably stand by tomorrow, God forbid, if Israel were facing extinction. And since we know that the Arabs, or Palestinians so-called, daily dream of our extinction, we will do everything possible to remain alive here in our own land. And if that bothers you, dear world, well, just think of how many times in the past you've bothered us. In any event, dear world, if you're bothered by us, here is one Jew living in Israel who could not care less. Rabbi Meir Kahana's words today ring truer than ever. May his wisdom and his martyrdom inspire us all to action and to ever greater Torah observance. On the evening of March 5th, 1990, the great Israeli rabbi and politician Meir Kahana held a speech on the second floor lecture hall of the Marriott Hotel in Manhattan, located at 525 Lexington Avenue, to an audience of mostly Orthodox Jews. After his speech, a crowd gathered around the Rebbe as he answered questions. Shortly after 9 p.m., an armed assassin, disguised as an Orthodox Jew, approached Rabbi Kahana and shot him with a .357 caliber pistol. The rabbi was hit in the neck, and he died of his wounds shortly thereafter. After the assassination, the assassin fled from the hotel, and he reached Lexington Avenue, where, in front of a local post office, he attempted to take over a taxicab at gunpoint. But Carlos Agosta, an on-duty police officer, drew his pistol and ordered the assassin to freeze. Instead, the assassin turned towards the officer and shot him in the chest. The officer shot the suspect, hitting him in the chin. Afterwards, the suspect was arrested. The rabbi's killer, not surprisingly, was an Egyptian-born Muslim American citizen named El Sayed Nasser, then living in New Jersey. It is time for us to stand up. It is time. It is past time. If we do not stand up today, we may never stand up. On the chat screen, Carol St. George says, are the Jewish schools K through 12? This would be very important as what I saw as problems with the Catholic Church for the children leaving the 8th grade for the public schools. It varies, Carol. There are schools that are fully Jewish. Most, like the book says, probably the majority of Jewish children go to regular public school and attend after school for an hour or two of Jewish training, or sometimes a Sunday school on Sundays. But it really varies with the particular school, how they handle that, and the particular community. The larger Jewish communities have basically K through 12 school systems. Marilyn says, I'm a member of the Jewish Defense League. And Guy says he was murdered, wasn't he? Yeah, as I just read, he was in fact murdered by an Al-Qaeda agent who was also a Muslim American citizen from Egypt. Shoshi says the song Lunatic Fringe, written and performed by Tom Cochrane and the Red Rider, was inspired by the work of Raoul Wallenberg did during World War II and the rising incidence of anti-Semitism in the 1980s. Right, Maryland confirms first victim of Al-Qaeda in America. Guy says, correct me if I'm wrong, I just see, like, in any religion, so much division among the Jewish people, they should be united. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, our sages tell us that the reason the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 CE was because of Jewish infighting. We are more divided today than we have ever been in our history. Orthodox divided among Orthodox. Mitnagdim divided against Hasid. Orthodox divided between Sephardic and Ashkenazi. Both groups divided against the non-Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Jewish Renewal. So much division. It's really, really sad. And yet, we cry out, Mashiach now, when we're doing the exact same thing that caused the Second Temple to be destroyed. In fact, it's rather ironic that the group who really popularized the slogan, Mashiach now, is among the most divisive groups within Orthodox Judaism. We cannot expect the Messiah to come as long as we lack Ahavat Yisrael, love of our fellow Jew. We are one people. We need to unite. But instead, we're going further and further apart to the point that especially in the diaspora, a significant percentage of Jews in the diaspora are not even accepted as Jews, according to certain Orthodox sect. It's very, very sad. We definitely are too divided. Guy says, of course, that problem is in the world division, but Hashem will correct it in his time. One of the things that Rambam lists as a sign that the Messiah has come is that he will do away with all the factionalism and he will unite our people. Sadly, I don't see that happening until Messiah does come. We are too divided, and we're becoming more divided every day. Again, that's why we at the House of Seven Beggars are so strongly emphasizing that a Jew is a Jew is a Jew regardless of movement. We consider this to be a fundamental problem with our people today. Marilyn says, my Noahide friends in Ontario are also members of JDL. JDL Canada is doing some great work. In the United States, JDL is still an illegal organization. When you said that you were a member, I remembered that you live in Canada. In America, it's illegal to belong to the JDL group, which does still exist in America, even though it is an illegal terrorist organization. And it's not, but that's the designation still. JDL Canada does some great work. I also am a member of it. They do some great work. Shoshi Randall says Jews are not very good at multiplication, but we're masters of division. Yep. Shoshi, you and Shlomo are the first people I ever heard use that phrase. You could not be more correct. Jews are not very good at multiplication, but we are masters of division. Sad but true. I want to thank you all for joining us. Again, I don't know what happened to our guest. I'm assuming I will hear from him shortly, or hopefully I'll hear from him pretty soon. We'll try to reschedule him. He will be, I think, a fascinating guest for our broadcast. I pray that he's okay and that he is not being persecuted for letting people know that he was going to be doing this broadcast, which is what my concern is. I don't think he is the kind of person that normally would skip out on something like this. He was quite excited about it. So we're done, though, for today. Thank you all for watching. Until next time, may God bless you, may God keep you, and may Hashem cause his light to shine evermore upon each and every one of you. Join us tomorrow and onward. We are now back to our normal schedule. That normal schedule will be listed in the closing credits. Thank you, friends. God bless.
Open up your eyes, see the beauty around you, and open up your ears and hear nature calling you, and open up your heart and feel the love he has for you, and open up your hand and give to the one who needs you. We got so much to do. The day is here for you. We got mitzvahs to do. That's all we got to do. And if you're feeling down, don't be alarmed. Just look to the one above and ask him for his love. For the secret to success is being very strong, knowing deep down inside that you're not at all alone. With infinite wisdom, and open up your spirit and catch its inspiration, and open up your soul to its spiritual liberation, and open up yourself to the way you should be living. We got so much to do. Is here for you. We got mitzvahs to do. That's all we got to do. And if you're feeling good, don't change your mood. Just look to the one above secret to success is being very strong and knowing deep down inside He's helped you all along. You're not at all alone. Open up your eyes, see the beauty around you, and open up yourself to the way you should be.